Alright, getting straight into it. Will Donald Trump annex Greenland? Time will tell. I have a few thoughts I wanted to share at least. My initial thought was to make a video titled something along the lines of why I was wrong about the EU, because as a good Swedish patriot I have of course an initial skepticism against the EU, but this was before reality kicked in and I realized that Sweden can't really do all too much on her own. Same thing goes for most European countries. I used an example in a podcast, in an episode of The Greatest Podcast. You can check it out, episode 7, Europa. I said the following, that in the year of 1700, the Swedish army, most formidable on earth. Today, not so much. I used the example of the Portuguese navy in the year of 1500, also up there, top tier force in the world. Today, not so much. Same thing goes for France and Germany. France on its own can't really do all too much. Germany on its own can't really do all too much. You can look at what happened to German infrastructure. Nord Stream, that pipeline got blown up. Germany didn't even object to it. So it's quite clear that the individual European nations can't really do all too much. So when Donald Trump says that he wants to annex Greenland, Denmark can't really do all too much. Now this is interesting because I've always supported Donald Trump. I'm happy I did, it was the right thing to do, but now all of a sudden we find ourselves on opposite ends. So Donald Trump, of course, President of the United States, and I, in my wildest dreams, if you will permit me to dream a bit here, the leader of a strong and united Europe. I would of course want Greenland to be in European hands, specifically Danish hands. And speaking of which, just a small historical side note here, yes, Greenland belongs to Denmark. The Vikings were first there, at least at the settled parts of it. Then you've had different Eskimo cultures as well, but the settled parts of Greenland, the Vikings were there first, so Denmark has every right to it. But, and here is the big revelation, this is the big point I want to make in this video, and that is that reality is back. History is back on the menu, boys, and that means that if the US wants Greenland, again, there's not so much Denmark can do. A strong Europe under a benevolent leadership could say to the US, you know, we got this, because the casus belli, if we can use that term, the cause Trump has for annexing Greenland is that he doesn't want it to fall to China or Russia or some other entity, and I understand him completely. I would have done the same were I Donald Trump. If I were on the American side of this particular conflict, I would have said, yeah, let's go for it, let's take Greenland, we can't leave it there for China to impose their will. So what we need to do now, in Europe, in the EU, we need to look ourselves critically in the mirror and say, yes, they can come in here, they can bully Denmark into giving away Greenland because we are simply not strong enough. Because how shall I put this in the most polite way possible? The idiots, the absolute idiots in Brussels, they are preoccupied with replacing the populations of Europe with immigrants from the third world, and then they act surprised when Europe becomes weak. Why is France weak? Yes, maybe because they've had mass immigration from the third world. Same thing in Sweden, same thing in Germany. We are weak because of stupid or malicious policies. So if we want to reassert ourselves, we need to first and foremost look at what is going on in our own societies, instead of acting surprised that, oh, this big bad Donald Trump, he wants to annex our territory. Yeah, it's what happens in history. This is geopolitics. It's what it is. It happens if you are weak. If you are weak, someone else will come to take your stuff. So therefore, what we need to do is what I've said before. We need to have good men and women in Brussels. So if you are a young man and you're listening to this, if you are in Europe, if you are in France or Italy or Germany or Sweden, go into politics, find your way to Brussels so that we can have good people there instead of the psychopaths that are currently in Brussels and Strasbourg. That is what we need to do. Then Europe can become strong again, can become serious again, instead of, yeah, as I said, focusing on replacing our own population and focusing on promoting sexual deviancy and all manner of craziness. Reality is back. Reality is back, so therefore we can no longer, pursue these crazy endeavors. So we need to get strong, we need to get serious, we need to get our guys in positions of power. And of course, to my brothers and sisters in Finland, in the US, hopefully we can have a good, strong alliance. But here is something to keep in mind as well, that Donald Trump, he may be a good man, but there's nothing that says that the next government of the US will be good. Maybe they will not be good at all. Maybe they will be another unhinged democratic regime that, you know, is not good for neither white Americans nor Europeans in Europe. So US, it is normal that they expand, but it is not necessarily good for Europe, and even worse, you know, I would rather see Greenland going to the US than to China. But I'm just saying this can also be a good wake-up call for Denmark, for Europe as a whole, that if we are weak, if we continue to not take life seriously, yeah, then we will be at the mercy of bigger powers, such as the US, or even worse, Russia or China. So, for example, if Russia were to invade Latvia tomorrow, what can be done? What can be done if the US says that, no, you know, you are on your own, we're not going to pay for your defense? What can be done? Yes, a lot could be done if Europe is united, if France and Germany primarily, if they are united. So that is my take. Now, the following, it pains me to say, it pains me greatly to say, as a patriot, you know, no one can doubt the love I have for my land. I can't even listen to the Swedish anthem without, you know, tears coming to my eye. No one can dispute my patriotism. That being said, I also realize that the time for petty nationalism, the dream of a Europe of free nations, small nations, it's gone, it needs to go. I am sorry. And I say that genuinely, I am sorry when I say that. It doesn't give me any pleasure to say at all. Again, the dreams of my youth, they were that Sweden would be not part of the EU, but now I understand that we need the EU, we need a strong, unified Europe, we need France and Germany to be together. I admire France, I love Germany, and I want to say to all Germans and Frenchmen who are watching this that France and Germany, they need to be one entity, one geopolitical entity. Now, to unite Europe, it doesn't mean that we need to mix all Europeans. You can look at Italy, they've been a country for over 100 years, but you still have a massive genetic difference between the north of Italy and the south of Italy. So you can still have a union without, you know, making everything into a homogeneous mess. You can still have different, distinct cultures, but at the same time you are in a union with each other. If we can't have a united Europe, we can at least have a Kalmar Unionen 2.0. So the Kalmar Union, it's a historical reference when the North, so the Nordic countries, they were one. But that will be for a different video. The most realistic thing is for us to get into Brussels and impose our will on that machinery. And now I hear you loud and clear, because I've used the same arguments back in the day, that the EU is absolutely horrible at the moment. Yes, it is. It is horrible at the moment, and this is where we implement our will on it. That we don't look at something and see it for what it is. We look at something and see what could it be if we can actually implement, if we can actually impose our will on it. So yes, the EU now, it needs to be restructured, but it is madness to give up on the project, and it's madness to not want to fight for that infrastructure. Imagine what could be done with a united Europe. We can do a lot of things. We can do a lot of things that are good for the world, for ourselves primarily, and also for the world. So yes, I am for the EU. I am definitely for the EU. Not the EU as we know it today, but something different, something better, something more life-affirming, something that puts the interests of the Europeans first. So, that being said, no more talk of Nexit, Netherlands exiting the EU, no more talk of Dexit, Swexit, no more talk of this. Now the focus is on making the EU good, making the EU into an institution, into an empire, if you will. If we permit ourselves to dream a bit bigger here, into an imperium based on higher ideals. XXO, boom.